The same fact holds true for the near 12 billion of us presently living on our earth, and that is we all wish and dream, because it is in our nature to want more than what we know we have. It is not a surprise there is the tradition of making a special wish on our birthdays, because every single one of us who has ever lived and desired, wants their wishes to come true, and after our ancestors began to understand the cosmos, and that we all have a most relevant day, the belief became prevalent throughout our species, that wishes would be more likely to become a reality, if there was the particular effort made on this day. The reason the belief developed, to become a custom that included the essential element of candles to be blown out in silence, is because through the action of blowing out and creating the smoke in quietude, it was believed the requested wish would be answered, as the silence showed the intent and concentration necessary to make the request be heard, while the dissipating smoke acted as the visual cue the given wish was being carried away to be granted. In our modern times, the person celebrating their birthday is presented with a cake, with candles on top, and before the candles are blown out, they are asked to make a secret wish for anything imaginable. After the candles have been blown out, they are then asked to not say what they wished for, but simply whether they believe with confidence the wish made shall come true, and if they are of understanding, they will answer yes to this question, with a smile upon their face, while if they are not of understanding, there may not be an affirmation, nor a smile. We believe the way the candles are blown out is a superstition, and makes no difference to the outcome, but we continue to enact the ritual, and it persists throughout all the cultures of our world, because we realize this is the most convenient means to teach our young why we believe the universe works the way it does, and why we act the way we do within it, in terms of how we relate to one another, and what we attempt to achieve together in our time here on earth. We were all exposed to the custom of the birthday wish from our very first birthday, and at every birthday of close friends and family, were attendant to the full theater of candles being blown out in silence, followed by the question being asked, and the answer being given, with or without a smile. Inevitably the time would come, for every one of us to inquire why there would be the confident, smiling affirmation from our guardians, and it was from this point forth, the custom took on a role as a teaching aid in our development. We learned that those who understood the custom, were all actually making the same wish when they were presented with their birthday cake, because when a little thought is given to the situation, there is only one wish that is the best imaginable wish to make under any circumstance, and this became known to us as the wish for the universe to work in the best way imaginable. The usual initial retort to this assertion, is the suggestion that the wish for the universe to work in a way better than imaginable, is an even more appropriate wish to make, but it is true to say that this wish does not wholly satisfy in the mind, as by definition, it cannot actually be imagined in reality. Another way to look at this, is to consider, that of all possible imaginable wishes we can make, we would not wish for anything other than the universe to work in the best way imaginable, because this would be like saying we would prefer to miss the opportunity for the universe to work in the best way imaginable. After grasping this understanding, our guardians would explain to us that the smiles upon their faces, were not only because of the knowledge the best wish had been made, but also because of their opinion the wish was to be granted to. At this point in our learning, there is only confusion, as the answers provided are ambiguous, and not fleshed out to the extent we can truly understand what has been presented, and there is also not even sufficient understanding of what the universe actually is in itself. To break it down, and start with the basics, the universe is explained to be, on a local level that what we sense, and on a larger level, all that there is to sense everywhere, and it is true to say we find ourselves in a universal mystery. The most common form of mystery is of the murder variety, and we are taught to consider that in a murder type of mystery, a detective aims to go through a logical process, so they can hopefully get to the stage where they can believe with confidence they know who committed the crime. In the same way with the universal mystery, we are taught to go through a logical process, to hopefully reach a conclusion where it is possible to believe with confidence how the universe works. In a murder mystery, a detective seeks to question everybody that could have conceivably committed the crime, and in testing whether these suspects have alibis or not, they can rule out anybody that could not possibly have been the culprit. In relation to the universal mystery, we can do the same thing, and though we can crudely imagine any theory of the universe being the truth, and be persuaded like this, once there is some serious questioning as to what is truly imaginable, then we can discard many alternative theories, until we are left with only those ones that have a firm basis in our true imagination. Where to start with this initially, is to get to the very bones of our experience, and this is to think about entities that cannot be broken down into more essential elements in the universe, and these entities are best thought of and explained to be simply objects within space and time. Looking at the first of these general phenomena, the reality is we can only imagine all the objects in the universe as being one thing, and through our scientific knowledge, the name we give these objects is evolutionary objects. In a broad sense, it is known that from a position of no objects, or what can be described as a point of singularity, evolutionary objects began to emerge through a process of cosmic evolution, evolving all the stars, and in our immediate experience our own star we call the Sun, all the planets, and our own planet we call the Earth, orbited by our Moon. On the local level of our Earth, there was an organic evolution of all the plants and animals, and eventually our evolved selves we call human beings, or the knowing animals, and we have gone on to create the technology, such as our household robots and hypersonic transportation, which can be further classified as associated evolution. All the evolution that is experienced, has been occurring within space and time for over 7 billion years, and physicists estimate our Sun will eventually die out, perhaps in over 100 billion years' time, and at some point after that, there will once again be no evolutionary objects left in the universe, and simply a point of singularity yet again. It is explained to us that in the time frame of this point-to-point of singularity, evolution accounts for every object in the universe with certainty, in the sense every object has directly evolved, or has evolved and exists through association with other objects that have naturally evolved. Every other theory of objects cannot account for all objects in this way, and so as every other idea of objects cannot be truly imagined, or explained with any precision, these theories of objects have been ultimately rejected by our species. To put this in the context of being a detective in such matters, our species has come to the conclusion, that we believe with confidence the universe is in essence evolutionary objects within space and time. As we turn our attention to the general phenomenon of space, it is best to firstly consider the idea of the point of singularity that has already been introduced, and it is easiest to imagine this point by simply closing our eyes, and if we are being honest with ourselves, we can only truly inhabit the space we are imagining, in the three dimensions of horizontally, vertically, and in altitude. It then follows, that every point in this nothingness can only be accounted for, if the space itself resembles a sphere of some description, and it is for this reason we interpret the point of singularity as being a seed. Within this universal seed, we can imagine traveling any given distance in any of the dimensions, and wherever we may end up, it would just be a point within the sphere. What we believe through our scientific understanding, is that the universal sphere has expanded rapidly to include all the evolved objects within it, and at our present point in time, it is now a size in all three dimensions of billions of light years across, and so vast we can only see a small fraction of the actual universe. It is for this reason our measurements read that the universe is flat, but we know that in reality the universe is so vast it only appears to be flat, and in all truth it is more akin to a spherical shape, and in any event it is not even possible to truly imagine the universe being anything other than this. We know that this vast sphere is getting even larger, and that when all the objects within it cease to exist at some point in time in at least 100 billion years in the future, it will be many more billions of light years across in the three dimensions. In the context of our detective work, and our earlier findings, because only this theory accounts for all space, and all other theories of space cannot even be truly imagined, we believe with confidence the universe is in essence evolutionary objects within spherical space and time. Turning to the general phenomenon of time, we know that just over 7 billion years in the past, there was a moment when the objective universe was nothing but an empty seed, and through what we have just discussed in relation to space, this can also be said of a moment in time at least 100 billion years in the future too. What we have learned through our scientific understanding, is that in an expanding universe like we are in now, and with no change in underlying physics, at some point in time in the future, gravity will become non-existent, and the sphere will go through a process of ripping, or tearing, from a massive state to a seed again, like a bursting balloon. With our eyes closed, we can imagine no change in visual appearance when there is the transition from a vast empty expanse to the point of singularity, and it is now considered common sense, that the only way we can imagine time, which accounts for all time, is to conclude that the moment after the universe bursts to seed, is the same moment as when it bursts from seed to, or, in other words, that time is cyclical, and these points in time are identical points in an endless recurrence. This theory is the only way that all time can be accounted for in the imagination, and the only way we can kind of explain what is happening before the universe began and after it ends. The reason we are taught to think of this as only kind of an explanation, is because in actual fact this is the wrong way to look at the situation, as logically speaking there can be no before or after the universe, as the belief is the universe is something naturally recurring within cyclical time. It is pointed out to us that this does not mean the future has already happened billions of years in the past, or the past is going to happen again billions of years in the future, as really the present moment is only happening once, and it is just a characteristic of the present moment that it is felt infinitely at these large intervals in time. In the sense of being detectives in such matters, though we can say we believe with confidence the universe is in essence evolutionary objects within spherical space and cyclical time, the fact of the matter is, that in regard the universal mystery, we have only really made general conclusions, in ruling out ideas that are truly unimaginable. This is the same as considering that in a murder mystery, a detective ruling out suspects that cannot be imagined as those capable of committing the crime, does not mean the crime is close to being solved. In a murder mystery, the suspects that remain need to be questioned more thoroughly, and if it should be the case there is only one suspect that appears to have a clear intent to commit the crime, then the detective must focus on their actions in particular. If there is direct evidence of the suspect being involved in the crime, there is an explanation for this evidence, and they can be apprehended, and the murder mystery is solved. In the same way with the universal mystery, we can state the only clear intent lies in the idea of the universe working in the way that is as good as imaginable, because it quite obviously does not work in the worst way imaginable, for the simple reason happiness is possible within it, and we are all for the most part happy to have been born and to be alive. Leading on from this, if we can examine the universe and see evidence of it working in the way we would most want it to, then there is an explanation for this as the manifestation of intent, and the mystery is solved with what is explained to be an explanation-based theory of the universe. The fact is though, that just like in a murder mystery, where motive and intent alone means nothing if there is not clear evidence of the crime being committed by the suspect, we need to find the evidence that the universe works in the exact way we would want it to, through analyzing various aspects of the experience we find ourselves in. The first specific phenomenon we are asked to consider, is the reason for why instead of nothingness, we find ourselves in this universe we believe to be evolutionary objects within spherical space and cyclical time. We are taught that the explanation for having this experience, is simply because it is wanted to be experienced, not just in the sense that we want to live as opposed to not live, but also that we want to live and feel the way we do, as the desires we have are really all we know that we want in our imagination, and we do not know we want anything that is non-evolutionary. In relation to finding ourselves as these evolutionary beings, the fact is we are all the product of evolution, and so are the best animals to fit our environment, and are the best equipped to find happiness as we can be, and we cannot say we would prefer to have not evolved, as it cannot truly be imagined being better equipped for the environment we find ourselves in, through a process of non-evolution. The point may be raised that a universe without pain and death would be preferable, but in reality, a world without pain and death cannot even be truly imagined, as life as we know it through evolution, requires the potential of pain and death to provide us the motivation to live in the way we are meant to live, and those events we call comical, beautiful, or sublime, all exist on a spectrum of proximity to pain and death, and we cannot say we would prefer to live in a world where these types of events could not occur. We can crudely say we would prefer a world without the specter of tragic events and loss, but if we live in the world we believe to be living in as evolutionary beings, the problem of loss caused by death is only a temporary problem, and there is no permanent loss, as every moment will be experienced again, and even a fleeting cherished moment with a loved one will be an experience encountered for eternity. We can also crudely say we would prefer a world where there is our own personal eternity within linear time, but if we live in the world we believe to be living in as evolutionary beings, our experience is of the evolutionary archetypes of being the cared for and the caring, and in successive generations these desired roles created through evolution are naturally diminished. It is therefore apparent our true preference is for evolutionary recurrence, and for everybody to have the opportunity to experience all moments of being cared for, and caring for others again, moments our inherent nature is trying to ensure are happy ones endlessly. Another specific phenomenon we are asked to consider, is the reason for why the universe will last over 100 billion years, and why there are so many stars within it. Again, the simple explanation is this is exactly what we want, as given careful consideration, it is our desire to have billions of lives sequentially, and with no memory of previous lives, which requires many billions of years in time, and a great abundance of stars created throughout this time period, so there is the potential to be born consistently throughout the total duration of the universe. It is normal to initially think we would prefer to have a recurrence of only this one life we lead, but the truth is, the more lives everyone has, the more equality of experience there is, and in the end there is the guarantee nobody will have a better experience than anybody else, which we must admit is what each and every one of us most truly wants. When this is really thought about, hundreds, thousands, and even millions of sequential lives cannot guarantee equality, but billions would be nearer to our desire, as by definition, even those events that can be described as being 1 in a billion type events, can be guaranteed to be experienced by everybody in time. In relation to the equality of our experience, we wish the experience to be known, and so our more specific wish is to only be born as human beings, and clearly the fairest way to administer our human lives, is for each and every one of us at our deaths, to be born again to the next available human host wherever they may be in the universe, subject to those already waiting in line to be born. We can think of other animals on our earth, such as our pets that we love, but we would not wish to experience being them, nor wish them knowing of their lives, which in evolutionary terms is a life that is not so free as ours. What has been described serves as an explanation-based theory of why the universe has so many stars within it, and why it will last at least 100 billion years, and as this is the only theory based upon a specific intent, other theories have been discounted as not warranting attention by our species. Another specific phenomenon we are asked to consider, is the reason for why we have discovered the universe explodes into being, starts decelerating, and then starts to accelerate once more. Continuing the same theme, it is explained to us that this is certainly what we would want to be the case, as we need everybody to have billions of sequential human lives, and there is actually only one way we can imagine this happening, and that is if nature ensures the maximum human population in the universe occurs as early as possible, with less and less humans being born as time goes by. The underlying principle behind this, and what we know to be the case through our scientific understanding, is that the universe had to accelerate in size rapidly, to ensure it grew at all, or else it would have fallen in on itself, and during this period, only vast stars and uninhabitable worlds were being produced, with no potential for human beings to evolve on Earths, and there was natural deceleration occurring over time. We know that through a change in the balance of elements underlying the structure of the universe, nature accelerated the growth again after a few billion years, and in this second phase, there is the most star production, but the acceleration means less gravity to enable star production to maintain, and so as there are less stars, and less potential evolution of human beings as time goes on, we have our desire for there to be a better chance of the most human species living in the universe near its beginning. In contrast to this reality, if the universe did not have this second phase of development, and continued to decelerate, then peak human population would more likely be at the end, and this can only be imagined as meaning some people having considerably less aggregate lives than others, which goes against the idea of a wished for justice. To summarize then, the explanation for the resultant accelerating universe, is because we need it to work like this, in order for us to have what we want, in terms of helping to guarantee that everybody has as many aggregate lives as everybody else, and there is no other explanation-based theory of why there is this evidence of an ultimately accelerating universe. A further specific phenomenon we are asked to consider, is the reason for why it appears impossible for human species to reach solar systems outside of their own. Again, this is explained to us as an explanation for what we want, as just as we would not have wanted any other human species to affect our Earth before we evolved on it, we would also not want to colonize any other Earth, because the idea of colonization for survival of a particular human species, goes against the idea of having an early peak human population in the universe. To ensure this law cannot be broken, we need nature to make it impossible for human species of different planetary systems to come into contact with one another, or even communicate with each other over these vast distances. Of course, this has not deterred us from visiting, and even establishing outposts, on many planets and moons in our own solar system, but there is no longer the belief our ancestors fostered, that we can explore the further galaxy through space travel, and in our understanding, there is not even the will for us to do this anymore anyway. In the 7 or so billion years since the universe began, we have found no evidence another human species has visited our solar system in this time, as we have mapped the moon's surface extensively by satellite, and even to a fair extent on foot, and there are no signs of the sort of things we would expect to find from a human species wanting to make a statement of their being, such as vast parallel lines on the surface, that could be spotted from afar and would last potentially billions of years. It is because of this lack of any evidence, that our only explanation for why it appears impossible for our human species to get to another solar system, and for any other human species to get to ours, is because this is exactly as we would want it to be. Though we have already considered many reasons for certain specific phenomena, another important thing to consider, is the reason for why there is unavoidable and irreversible climate change on our Earth in our fairly recent history. Following the same logic as previous examples, the explanation that is provided to us, is because it is wished to be this way, as there has to be a guaranteed means to ensure our particular human species cannot last too long at a high population, for to be able to would put at risk the maximum human population being early in the universe. What is needed, is a means to ensure that any particular human species cannot last too long, and this can be seen to be achievable through creating a trigger that every human species will pull, and an industrial revolution and resulting increased burning of fossil fuels, can act as this trigger. It is impossible to imagine on our, or on any other Earth inhabited by human beings, how a movement to stop this practice could happen before it became widespread, and how the understanding of what was going on could come in time to stop it from happening. The best way to think about the process of a climate change trigger, is considering the attempted opening of a freezer door that has very rusty hinges, and though there is the strength to pull it open, and it is very hard to initially do so, there is not then the strength to push it shut once more, and even if the door is left only slightly ajar, in the end, everything in the freezer shall defrost. We became aware of the science early enough to ensure our own freezer door did not open wide, but the damage was already done, and we know that global warming has extensively melted our ice caps, and a combination of rising oceans, failing ocean currents, and greater frequency and intensity of meteorological and geological events, has meant scientists now believe it is inevitable our species cannot avoid becoming extinct, through a series of massive volcanic eruptions and ensuing ice ball Earth. As sunlight fails to penetrate our blanketed atmosphere. Although we all find this scenario harrowing, it is reminded that this is actually what we want, Firstly, because we need a system that begins to destroy us before we can stop it, to ensure a peak human population early in the universe, but also because we want our extinction to be guaranteed, and a catastrophic ice age that renders the planet uninhabitable in a relatively short period of time, meets this need of ours ideally. The final specific phenomenon we are asked to consider, is the reason for why we have discovered a large amount of solitary within solar system Earths in our galaxy, that appear to have been habitable in the past, or will likely be habitable in the future, and why these Earths are all of similar relative size to our own. Just like all the other previous examples, the explanation-based theory of the universe can state this is because it is exactly what we would want, and our expectation, for the reason of the abundance required to have humanity existing for the majority of the duration of the universe, and also because of the isolation necessary to ensure human species cannot influence one another in their development. Related to what we have just discussed, a significant reason why we would wish similar sizes of Earth, is because a larger Earth would mean the climate tipping point may be reached earlier, as there is a greater chance of a larger population burning more fossil fuels, whilst we can imagine with a significantly smaller Earth, the species may never reach the tipping point, which is necessary and desired to be reached in every human species evolution. Similarly, a significantly larger Earth would require far more catastrophic events to potentially make the human population extinct, while a significantly smaller Earth may have a chance catastrophic event like a comet strike that could annihilate the potential of evolution to humanity in that world. The last thing to consider is if, for instance, our Earth had been significantly larger, it would have taken much longer and perhaps even have become impossible for our animal ancestors to usurp the large monsters that roamed in prehistoric times, while in the other extreme, if the Earth had been much smaller, then there would perhaps not have been the space to evolve at all. It is for all the above reasons, we have an explanation for why the habitable Earths we have found in our galaxy are abundant, yet isolated, and are all of similar relative size to our own. The consideration of all the above evidence has served to show there is an explanation for the way the universe is, and hence the reason why we believe with confidence that it works in the way that is as good as truly imaginable. In the murder mystery, if there is one suspect that has a motive and the evidence also suggests they are the only suspect, then all other suspects are not warranted any further attention and can be dismissed, and the same goes with the universal mystery, as all other theories can only be considered as being less likely, as they do not have an associated intent, or specific explanation for the evidence cited. A characteristic of the murder mystery may be that we cannot definitively know who done it, but through the logic, we can still believe with confidence we have the right suspect, and the same goes for the universal mystery too. With a murder mystery, there may still be questions unanswered, such as how the murder was actually committed, and this questioning of how can be a source of doubt that reduces confidence in the verdict, and in this case the judge and jury must state that their decision is based on the simple explanation of why, and not this complex question of how, that is in actual fact not relevant to their judgment. The same goes with the universal mystery, in that if the complexity of how is questioned, then it can create doubt, but the fact of the matter is, the complexity of how is answered by the simplicity of why, and the accused is the simplest explanation-based theory, when all others are not, even though what we have before us is the complexity and beauty we see in the universe, and what we believe lies behind the universe as a metaphysic. We are all aware that even with the logical perspective of stating the universe is as good as imaginable based on a great deal of evidence, on the experiential level this notion conflicts with the fact it is still very difficult to live a consistently happy life in the world. We are all taught to address this concern, by firstly considering the fact that it has never been so easy for human beings to live in our world, wherever they may be born into it, and it is important to understand the context of how we have reached this relative peace as a species. In a murder mystery, it can be imagined as natural, that after the knowledge of this event, leaders in different communities would make decisions about who committed the crime, independently of other communities, in the best interest of keeping harmony in their own, and as time went by, and they came to know there were different ideas of who the assailant might be, this would sow doubt that the accused was the culprit, and only through a proper trial and judgment, could there finally be peace of mind throughout all of the communities. Likewise, in the universal mystery, our ancestral leaders made decisions about how the universe worked, in order to preserve peace the best way they could, but as time went on, it became apparent there were a multitude of different beliefs, and there could not be true peace, until the explanation-based theory of the universe was understood by the majority. The fundamental reason why peace could not be possible until this theory was understood, is because there was not the belief that every act of harm, or failure to help another, or the world itself, is amplified infinitely, and so without actually believing this to be true, the prevailing lead measurement of success in our species before this understanding, was individual wealth through whatever means necessary, as opposed to our enlightened measurement of success, as living a sustainable and caring lifestyle example. Since our learning of this imperative, the single most important factor to the fostering of peace, was the very wealthy becoming willing to be highly taxed, in terms of their land, businesses, and incomes, without seeking any tax avoidance, as it was only through this redistribution of great wealth, that the ideal we have could then be attained. Because of essentially vastly increased aid to poorer countries, and incentivizing these poorer countries to develop as intended, we now have democracy in every country of our world, and there is no armed conflict of peoples, within and between countries. Over and above this, any human being born into the world, can only voluntarily be in poverty, for through all of our nations providing a generous minimum income to all of our peoples, means we are all now supplied with the financial security to alleviate poverty at every step of our lives. As a direct result of this initiative, the pool of total potential investors in useful and efficient technology to aid the species, has grown over time, and it is therefore of no surprise, economic growth and our overall standard of living, has grown also, and because of the wealth, ambition, and material ability to afford sustainable practices, we are all now standing upon an earth that has prospered and not declined. An interesting thing about this world we now reside in, is that through sustainability, and changing the way we live and interact with nature, the human population has never been so high, and it is in considering this, that leads to another aspect of why we believe we live in the best universe imaginable. We know that if we had not begun to understand the universe as early as we did, then in every sense it would have been impossible to have achieved a population such as what we have, or indeed actually survived as a species so long, and it is not hard to believe, that if there are other human species, as we believe there to be, there may be many that fall short or our achievements. At the same time, we know we could have understood the universe earlier, and been quicker at changing our ways to achieve the ideals, and so it is our belief, there are surely other human species that have and will achieve higher total populations, due to living in ideal for longer than we do. Because of the correlation between total population and the ideal, it is also our belief, that when we die our next experienced life, is most probably as a human being in the best presently existing world, and that the most probable world we all could live in at least once, is that world that was the best in the universe. Though this is a logical conclusion of our belief, it is not so easy to explain why the average experience itself cannot be guaranteed to be more ideal, when our own historical fact, is that more people have lived on our earth in non-ideal than ideal, and we are now running out of time to correct this statistic. How this tallies with our belief we live in the best universe imaginable, is that if our ancestors had believed other presently existing worlds in the universe were definitively in ideal, through it being easier to achieve the ideal, then this would have reduced their effort to attain the ideal on our own world, and so less of our own species would have experienced the ideal in our history. Following on from this, we can say that though in a general sense we want the universe to work in the way we would most want it to, in a more specific sense, we are wishing for and believing that nature is helping us attain the highest average experience of ideal as is possible, and that the difficulty level of the universe, is therefore as close to perfect as it is possible to be. Even after considering all of that has been discussed, there may still be the thought life can be imagined being easier, but the thing is, if life were easier, and the great problems of famine, childhood mortality, dangerous epidemics, and wars being less likely, then we can only imagine this meaning more people being born and living long enough to reproduce at an earlier time in our history, and so the average experience of ideal would be reduced overall, which is not what we would wish for. The same goes with our inability to cure terminal illnesses, that started to become more prevalent in our history, as we began to have the opportunity to overindulge as individuals and societies, but the truth is, that if there were cures to terminal illnesses, this would mean there would not be the natural drive for people to live the lives which we know now to reflect success, in terms of being caring to ourselves, others, and the environment. It may be raised why there is so much selfishness and competitiveness in human nature, but if selfishness and competitiveness were made to be less likely, then there would not be the motivation to become better than others, and as free from need as can be, and though in the whole of human history this has resulted in the exploitation of one over another, and nation over nation, it had to be this way, for us to get to where we are now, and have as high an average experience of ideal as we do. Related to selfishness and competitiveness, comes the emotion of jealousy, which leads on to examples of violence and murder when externalized, and self-harm and suicide when internalized, but to make murder and suicide impossible, which they of course are not, would be to make our nature less selfish and competitive, which leads back to a conclusion that is a lower average experience of ideal in the world. We are all aware that anxiety and depression are natural emotions, and there should be the perspective to see, that after trying as hard as possible, and perhaps failing in various endeavors, or being frustrated at the hand we have been dealt in life, knowing that if life were any easier, then there would not be so much overall experience of the ideal, and so our delicateness and fragility in the world, is believed to be the best scenario imaginable. In addition, though nature creates a justifiably powerful urge to ensure the continuation of our species, many of us do not have feelings for the opposite sex, or have greater feelings for the same sex, but everybody of understanding, knows and appreciates that this propensity in nature to feel this way, is believed to be the natural balance, and because it is believed anything different to this is negative for the overall average experience of ideal, we should therefore all be proud of our own sexuality, and tolerant of other people's. We believe that suffering in the world is the explanation for why the universe is not any larger than it is, because it needs to be large enough to ensure there is the highest average experience of ideal, but small enough to minimize the total experience of non-ideal, and the negative events from day to day that are amplified in cyclic time. This is wished for, not just for the above reason, but also because of the personal reason, we are in a special club of those who can experience the universe, and though our belief is there are perhaps trillions who experience life, and this might not seem so special, the truth is, this number is in reality a small number, as any imaginable given number, is small compared with what can be possibly imagined. We believe all human species had, or will have, a culture of wish-making on birthdays, and we believe with confidence, that for every human being who has ever, or will ever make a single wish, that wish is for nature to try and ensure the highest imaginable average experience of ideal, and at the same time, the lowest total experience of non-ideal. This is the wish that our ancestors made subconsciously in the past, and what we explicitly consider on our birthdays today, and we celebrate the fact the wish is believed to come true, by on these days sharing memories with family and friends, such as photos of old times, and the smiles and laughter of those moments, that we all believe will happen again and fresh, only a universal age away from the moment they were taken. We can get quite nostalgic for these times, which are for most people the happiest of their lives, and there is no coincidence this is the case, as this was when we all had our first friendships, achievements, and loves, and the birthday parties that are thrown for us, try and incorporate the sensing of our youth, that we all believe will return again and in innocence, without any memory of having been before. These parties are usually full of music from our past, as we find music takes us back to these specific times more than any other medium in art, and many of us agree, that it is most prevalently through music and dance, we can truly worship the moment, and love for its recurrence. We all of course cannot escape a last birthday upon this earth, and it is another ideal of our age, that ensures the majority of us know when that birthday is going to be, and so can plan for a final celebration of our lives, and what we believe will be again. This has been made possible through the ideal of euthanasia laws across all the countries of our world, which means that when the pain of old age comes, we can, through the help of others, end our lives in dignity, as any prolonged pain that is experienced, we believe shall be amplified again and again, and it is undignified to go through this pain endlessly and needlessly. All of us of understanding are ready in this life to end our lives, if the earth should begin to topple toward the ice ball scenario, but we hope we are still blessed with a few more generations, so our young will not have to face this reality in their lifetimes. After we pass, the vast majority of us request our bodies be turned to ash through water cremation, for the ethical reason this is the most environmentally friendly way to go, but also for the personal reason we want our loved ones to leave our ashes in places of significance in our lives. We can explain this enduring ritual, through our belief ash can be seen to be a type of magic dust, and by far the most popular tradition, is for couples who have died, to request their combined ashes be thrown at the place they met, or perhaps shared their first kiss, and the belief is, that as if by magic, and in a universal age, and at the same venue where the ashes were scattered, the lovers will be brought together once more. We may also request our ashes be thrown at other significant places of our lives, and even request they be scattered at places where there was great personal trauma too, such as the site of a tragic death of someone most dear to us, for this is representative of being a guardian angel, already there for the beloved in their time of need, and always to be there when the time is being revisited. Though we don't believe in a permanent loss, we think some things are deserving of the attempt to preserve, and we try and prolong nature for important artifacts in our evolution. For thousands of years, we have looked after items of historical significance in museums on this earth, to ensure they are looked after as worthily as possible, and in the last century, as we know our time has been closing in, we have started moving items from traditional museums, onto a special museum we have built upon our moon, which we believe should be able to hold and preserve these items for possibly millions, if not billions of years. This museum contains artifacts such as our great art, like that which portrays the myths created by all our cultures, that inspired our ancestors to goodness, and which we celebrate to this day through our religious festivals and celebrations. It also contains chronicles of great sporting achievement, scientific and technological significance on a global level, that has enabled our ideal, and also the proud history of all our nations, and their battles for independence won, all of which we believe will be won again and again throughout the ages. We try and instill in our young, the belief that if they work hard, then the reward for their achievements, will not only be their personal satisfaction over and over again in cyclic time, but also the knowledge, their works as individuals and with others, will get to this great exhibition in the sky, and last for potentially billions of years at a time too. The museum was built upon the exact pinnacle of our moon's highest crater plateau, because of our ancestors' fascination with this specific spot, as this was the location where they watched in anticipation, as there was the exploration for signs of intelligent life. Knowing any other prior human species to our own, would have left something here, if anywhere. Of course, nothing was found there, as we would expect and desire to be the case, as we do not want it to be possible to get to the precious hoards of other human species in our own lifetime. But this does explain the reasoning for where and when we usually partake of our old and beautiful custom of the birthday wish. For after blowing out the candles, and watching the smoke rise in silence against a clear and starry night, we can think of all the great treasure to be found on the many islands of the universe, and can also believe with confidence, those same troves are ours to be created. The end.